Welcome everyone to Milfuzz TV. I am Peter, and today I'm going to be talking about Dexter Resurrection, episode 4. It's called Call Me Red. So, spoilers for the episode per usual. This is a Patreon sponsor review, so thank you very much to Cindy for picking the show. So, yeah, I mean, this one I think feels a little fresher out of the past few episodes, just purely because it goes on this pivot of Dexter going to this VIP dinner for serial killers is just so inherently different to what the show has been doing up until this point, and is fairly inherently fresh just in the history of the show. At least I don't remember anything remotely like this from the original series. So I think on that front, at least it's mildly, I feel like there's at least a little bit of intrigue as to exactly where they're going with this. You could argue that it's just kind of like a way of doing a bunch of what the show's done before, but combined. Because like each season of the show, he would typically get close to one person. Sometimes that one person would be another serial killer. Sometimes it's just someone who learns what he is and tries to exploit it or whatever. And then that story would play out, and that would be the main arc of each season. Whereas here, he meets like 4 or 5 people who are all killers in some respect, and we get a sense of who some of them are. Obviously, one he takes care of by the end of the episode because they're imminently going to kill someone else. So he chooses to do that. But that's what a lot of this episode focuses on. Obviously, there's also the Batista coming to New York stuff, which actually intersects more with Harrison than it does with Dexter so far. So yeah, I mean, as far as like the episode as a whole feels a little bit longer. There's new people to bounce things off. There's a lot of second or backseat driving, to use that term again, from Harry trying to talk Dexter out of going on this dinner and trying to talk him out of like feeling like he can talk to these people, and that that this is actually maybe a bad thing, even though for Dexter it feels really oddly kind of cathartic to actually just say out loud that he's a serial killer and that he started thinking about it at an early age and he knew he was different. Being able to like talk about that openly to a group of people is something that's, not, I mean, he's told individual people before, but a group of people who all on some level understand, who all have their own name for the urge. He calls his the Dark Passenger, of course, but that's something the show's always had. There's one of them, there's the urge, the itch, the whatever. I can't even remember what they all said, but they all had their own name for that need, that desire, where it's inevitable that they're going to kill someone. So, I mean, yeah, I think much of this discussion is probably going to be looking at these new characters and both the killers, but also, of course, the person running this dinner, who turns out to be obviously a very rich man. It's Peter Dinklage character. What's his name? Leon Prater is his name. I did not remember that at all, but he's like this like serial killer super fan. He doesn't kill anyone himself, but he collects mementos. He likes getting either the weapons or a trophy that some of these killers have had. Some of the people who come to these dinners have contributed a trophy of theirs, and he would, well, I say Dexter, Red, right, the Dark Passenger, was asked to bring one of his trophies as a gift. So Dexter brought one of the license or the driver licenses, and he hands it over. But that comes after we get this tour through his museum, this secret museum he's got trapped behind a bookcase in the wine cellar. I say bookcase, it was probably a wine rack, but you know what I mean. It's got that kind of Batcave kind of thing going for it. This obviously ended up also being a bit of a trove for references to stuff in the show, because we get a couple of items in here for killers that have been in the show. And what's interesting about that is that it does kind of suggest maybe that they came to some of these dinners. They didn't necessarily come to these dinners. After all, one of the things we see down here is Dexter's own trophies. The slides of blood that he kept in the original show are down here. Dinklage says that he bought it from an FBI agent who had a gambling debt or something. And Dexter sees these things, and it's kind of this thing. He never thought he'd see these ever again, so it's kind of like a big moment for him. I think this batch of referencing and calls to the past is inherently better than what we did back in episode 1, you know, with the dreams and the cameos where we got to see these actors show up. Like, I get why they felt they wanted to do that and why it would excite some people just to see some of these faces, but it was kind of hollow, it was kind of worthless, it was just so they could have the cameos. At least here, it makes a bit more sense. It feels a bit more natural if you've got this character who's collecting all these serial killer things, and there's like something from Ted Bundy, Manson, all that. You don't see the name. I don't think you get to see the plaque where the killer's name, but there's like a lampshade which I'm pretty sure is from Ed Gein, based on what I know about Ed Gein and the fact that some of the stuff in Texas Chainsaw was based on him. But then of course it's like, hey, I've got like one of the hammers from the Trinity Killer, and obviously Dexter like pauses and looks at it because this is someone very, you know, important from his past that killed his wife. And I thought that was interesting because my initial thought was, wait, does this mean that the Trinity Killer, John Lithgow, did he ever come to one of these things? Now, admittedly, it sounds later on in the episode that it's a bit unclear how long these dinners have been going, and it might have only been, you know, 5 or 6 years. It may not go far back enough to be actually reaching into the original show. So the actual thought I was having here probably doesn't even apply, but it is interesting to think if these had been going back that far, does that mean that he'd come to these things? Was he associating with other serial killers? But like I said, a lot of the other things that he has, some are contributions from the killers that he meets, but some are just like things that he's bought on the black market or he's, you know, secured somehow after the fact, like Dexter Slides, like the ice truck killer's like fridge, I think he has, where there's like blood dripping out of it, or I mean, it's not dripping anymore; it's dry, but. You know, just these various artifacts in this museum, and it's kind of, you know, it's more natural, and at the very least, the things that come up feel like we're kind of exploring Dexter as a, like, you know, like, if he's going to be meeting other serial killers, it kind of thematically makes sense to bring up some of the ones that he's interacted with in the past in a more meaningful way, right? Ones that he got to know, ones that he wanted to grow a bond with in some way, like his brother, or the one that actually had an impact on his family. And then that leads us into, you know, okay, what are these other people going to be then? Because when Dexter's getting shown all this, it's before the others have shown up. It's before we get the rest of them. So he thinks Dinklage is a crazy person, which is a fair assessment given this collection that he's amassed, and that he likes to pay serial killers to come and have dinner with him. But yeah, I mean, obviously, once we get into the rest of the killers and meet them, we have some interesting potential characters. So a couple of them are teased in the trophy room where we see some of their trophies. One is Neil Patrick Harris, who's here for this episode and is dead by the end of the episode, but he actually like kills people and takes their skin, specifically where they've got a tattoo. So he's like a tattoo killer or something. But he's going to attack someone pretty soon, like the very next day, and that's why Dexter intervenes and goes after him as quickly as he can. But we also get some others. We get a guy who loves to keep the ponytails of the women that he kills, and that's someone we meet. And he's like this family man who's very kind of, you know, like you wouldn't think serial killer from him. It's kind of like going down that path again. That was a big thing with the Trinity Killer, is that it was like a twist almost in season 4 when it was revealed that he had a family and kids and that he was thriving in his personal life despite everything he was doing quietly away from him. We have David Daxmalakian. I'm probably butchering his last name. I never know how to say it, but he's here. Fine casting. Like, not to be mean to the guy, but he does kind of have a serial killer look to him. So he's good casting. He's quite mysterious in this episode. We don't really get much of a sense of what he does, like what his MO is, whereas the others we get kind of a sense. And then the other big one, of course, is Kristen Ritter, who is here. Her name is Mia, but her like killer name in the press is Lady Vengeance, which she isn't in love with, obviously. But she's obviously the one that's going to have the most kind of like direct impact on Dexter, at least, you know, from what we can see so far, because immediately there's obviously an attraction there on Dexter's part. And the thing that very quickly comes up, though, when he becomes aware of her, maybe even before he meets her, when he sees the trophies, but she is someone who targets specifically, like perpetrators of sexual assault, right? She goes after rapists. And immediately Dexter's thinking, does she have a code? And I think, to give credit to the writers here, and I'm not one to do that in a Dexter show at this point, but to give credit to the writers here, having that be the same thing that Harrison has started to like possibly develop a code for, like the same kind of crime, is interesting because it's not only just like, oh, she's not like, she's kind of like me. She only goes after people that are evil in some way. Slightly different from what I go after, but certainly one that he can, empathize with. But it's also something that his son has also just done. So immediately there's something to kind of like personally look at her and think, oh, she has the same moral compass as my son. He doesn't say that. Like his narration in his head never like brings that up. But I think it's an intentional link between them. I think it made sense for that to be the type of thing that Harrison, provoked him to kill like he did. But I think obviously knowing they were going to introduce this character whose entire MO is that they go after guys like that is intentional. I think they were setting up some of the ideas there with that stuff. So I mean, most of the serial killer VIP stuff was okay. Like I think, like maybe the biggest problem really at this point with Dexter as a character is that maybe I'm just like I'm almost kind of just over like his pretending to be normal. And now obviously in this context he's pretending to be a different serial killer, but he's still kind of lying in the same way that he normally does, right? He's still pretending to be this dark passenger, and one of them even cracks a joke about how, I had trouble getting a car here. I guess I have you to thank for that. And he's making little comments and things like that and whatnot, and it's like it almost feels like he's lying like he used to in the police station talking to his colleagues. It's only just different this time because they're serial killers, and he's actually planning on probably killing all or most of them. Kristen Ritter's character being the one that might be the obvious exception, depending on where the plot goes. So it's like, okay, this is a little bit different. Like I say, a lot of the previous seasons of the original show did have him getting to know a killer. That was like a big thing. So it's not like individually any of these are that interesting. But the idea of them being here as a group, the idea of this guy being a collector, it does kind of feel like if this is the last time they do a Dexter show, and I'm not going to say that it will be because they keep bringing it back. They keep resurrecting this goddamn show. We're still here talking about it. Over 20 years since the original show debuted. Imagine if I had a season every year since it started. We'd be on like season 21 or 22 by this point. It's insane. But at the very least, this does feel like you could see this as being the final Dexter story, because it's kind of like bringing in this idea of people who are obsessed with murderers and using that as a device to kind of almost act like a greatest hits of like looking back at all the meaningful killers. I think it's interesting that all of the meaningful killers that are referenced this season in this episode and back in episode 1, it was the Ace Truck Killer, it was Jeremy McGill's, or not McGill, Jeremy McGill's from Better Call Saul, Jimmy Smith. And then it was obviously Trinity Killer's been brought up a bunch, right? Trinity and the Ace Truck Killer are the ones that get brought up a lot, right? Like, how much have they referenced any killers from past season 4? Maybe they have, and I've just not noticed because I've forgotten those seasons for the most part, even though I watched most of them. But it doesn't feel like they've been bringing up much stuff from them. Like, no one's brought up Julia Stiles. Not that she was a killer, but like, no one seems to be bringing up stuff there, with the exception of Batista talking about the death of like Roberta and Deb. He even brings up Deb this episode. So he's kind of referencing some of that later stuff. But all of the stuff that's meant to get a reaction in Dexter and all the stuff that's getting a reaction out of the audience for the nostalgia, it's all from the first half of the original show, as far as I can tell. Again, maybe there's some sly references that I'm not catching because I don't remember that stuff that well. And I didn't watch New Blood, and I didn't watch the last season of the original show. I watched season 8, I want to say. So it's possible that they're there, but it feels like the show inherently and what it's picking to reference a lot is kind of admitting that's when it was better. And that's the stuff that's important. The fact that we're bringing up the name the Bay Harbor Butcher again, and we're talking about that a lot. Because, I actually did not hate towards the end of the episode when he does get Neil Patrick Harris on the table, and Neil Patrick Harris wakes up. I enjoyed the interaction here because Neil Patrick Harris does not get scared. He kind of just knows it's inevitable and understands that. And, that, again, that's not completely new for the show. I definitely remember the Trinity Killer, John Lithgow. I definitely remember him not reacting the same way that most people do when they're on the table and they get scared. But, given like how kind of like open and how they're all talking about it at this VIP dinner, you kind of get this sense that, yeah, it makes a lot of sense that he wouldn't overly react. He would just kind of accept that this is what his fate is. But I did laugh a little bit when, Dexter kind of says, "Hey, by the way, I'm not, this red guy. I'm not the dark passenger." And he's like, "Well, who are you?" And he's like, "Well, I'm Dexter Morgan, the Bay Harbor butcher." And then Neil Patrick Harris just like yells an F-bomb as Dexter stabs him. You could argue that why is he like scared? Like he knows he's going to die anyway at this point. It's not really changing anything. But maybe it's more just the idea of like the shock of like, because I think, correct me in the comments if I'm wrong, but it was known back when they did all that stuff in season 2, where they found the bodies. Like it was known that his victims were all serial killers, right? Like that was a public thing. Like people know that the Bay Harbor butcher was killing other serial killers. So I think it's like the realization of that and his reaction to it was at least a little bit funny, right? And Dexter tends to be at its best when it's being a little darkly funny. I think one of the big problems with the original show is it just went too long and it felt like they just milked the same, idea. The idea that was good for a few seasons of what Dexter was. Just there wasn't anything new to explore at a certain point, so it felt very repetitious. Which is why I kind of appreciate just kind of how big and weird this is going with the whole club for serial killers. Like it's at least kind of wacky and maybe could be fun along the way. I don't really have much faith that the conclusion is going to be satisfying or be some great story inherently. But as far as like the plot goes, this is probably the most I enjoyed the main plot of the show in terms of following Dexter around, right? Because it felt like it was okay. It's doing stuff that feels a bit more fresh. So I think that's fine. And obviously, we need to talk a bit more about Kristen Ritter's character because they meet the next day to talk more openly one-on-one. And it turns out, Peter Dinklage has some rules, and it's very out in the open that he had that other killer killed with his own bat. We saw Uma Thurman do that back in episode 2. And seemingly, yeah, if you try and like betray the group, if you try and do anything that puts them at harm or exposes what this group is, then you're done. So potentially Dexter's got a big problem because like they're going to be suspicious of the new guy when one of them's dead because they've got like a whole 2 week of plans where they're going to do different activities apparently. So that's something he's going to have to deal with. But he's talking to Kristen Ritter, they're getting to know each other, and she had a little sister who was a victim, and that's when she first killed. She knew she was different before that, and she kind of like tried to like put her energy into like ballet, I think she said, where she tried to like, focus all that energy into something like that. But then once she came home and found her sister had been attacked, she killed the guy, and that kind of like unlocked the path, if you will. And Dexter kind of openly talks about that as well. But she invites him back to her like Airbnb that she's staying at. In fact, one of the running jokes in this episode is that Red, who Dexter's pretending to be, he turns out to be the vegan that was at the table. So there's a whole bit where they're sitting down during the dinner and they're all getting these big slabs of steak or whatever it is. And Dexter's all excited because it's been a real running thing this season that he's been hungry and he's been eating food and whatnot. And they pull up his like individual plate and they take off the lid, and it's like this vegan dish that clearly is not that appetizing and is not what he wants, but he has to keep up the appearance. And this is paid off here. She apparently was planning on bringing him back to hers because she got pastries and she had a vegan one for him. So he looks at the pastries that she's going to get, and it's like, a cinnamon roll or something, and it looks very appetizing. And then she's like, "Oh, here's the kale one. Here's the vegan pastry for you." And he's just deflated. They also pay it off like after the VIP dinner itself, where he buys some chili dogs on the street as he's walking through New York. And that's when he sees that Peter Dinklage is a very public sort of millionaire or billionaire who helps like donate money to the police. There's a big billboard with him shaking hands and whatnot. So it's establishing these things, and like there's kind of like a like almost sex scene between him and Kristen Ritter where they're getting to know each other, and she kind of says she's going for a shower, but is clearly looking back at him when she's taking off her top, like, join me, come in. However, he's already made plans to go meet up with Neil Patrick Harris, and he's basically faced with the choice here of having sex or going to save someone's life, and he does that, right? Now, you could debate, of course, is he doing it to save the life, or is he doing it because he wants to kill? I mean, that's, I think, open for some debate. But, like, that's what he goes and does, and sure enough, that leads to all the Neil Patrick Harris stuff as that plays out. Um, this is interesting. Particularly because she's like, it's one thing when he meets someone who becomes more open to what he is. That was a big plot point in season 2 as well, if I remember. With that, was it Lila? Was the woman that he met? Um, Even a kind of a similar type actually. He's definitely like, well, he's not got a type because his wife was very different, but like in terms of like the edgier women that he meets, he's got a type. But he like that was very much like she kind of started to kind of get into his world and start to like try and take advantage of it. This is a little bit different because this woman is just a serial killer. Like she kind of relates to him, or he can relate to her in a way that's probably very new and very different. Um, Having said that, was Yvonne Strahovski's character like a serial killer that he filmed for? I can't remember. That was the later seasons. That's all kind of become a bit of a blur. But there's definitely chemistry here. It feels like it's going somewhere, and he bails out at the time, says he has to go, but that's going to be left dangling. Now, is he going to be honest with her at some point and explain that he's not the killer they think he is? He's actually a killer that hunts serial killers, but not her, because she kills bad people. So she doesn't fit the code, right? She doesn't fit his code that he's got. But curious to see how they handle that. And I don't really trust the show all that much for it to be a complete success. just because like, I think when Dexter's being entertaining, is entertaining in like a kind of a surface level way. Like, I think maybe the trick of Dexter back when it started was kind of like the appearance of some depth, but I don't think it's actually that all that deep. It's kind of fluffy, and it's more just very surface level. And like we could be seriously exploring some of the ideas of what makes a killer want to kill, and like how he interacts with the people around him. But it's mostly used for fairly typical drama. It's more like it's like the family man who kills people in this episode when he's talking to others, and he's like, "Oh, I spend all this time with my family." And Dexter's monologue in his head is like, "Hey, my son doesn't even know I'm alive." Like, it's all just about coming back to the basic drama points and like the comparisons of what he's going through. And that's where, like, when it comes up to things like, oh, there's potential here for these two characters, where is it going to go? Is it going to feel like it pays off? When it does, I'm not really trusting it well, because I know the show has let me down in that way in the past. And even arguably with Harrison and his friend, Elsa, like, I feel like even they feel like they're in kind of a weird place. Like, the last scene they had last episode was her still kind of been mad at him about having to lie, or not lie, but having to corroborate his story with the police. And yet this episode, the very first interaction they have, she is clearly in a good mood. They're very flirty. It feels like it's maybe progressing and going places, almost like they were never mad before. She does have like a bit where she sticks up for him again. Actually, kind of makes things worse inadvertently, but she's trying to do the right thing. And when he's at her place again and he's going to crash on the couch, he kind of goes in for a kiss. She pulls away. He feels embarrassed and gets awkward and says he has to leave. And she sort of feels bad. The impression you get by the end of the scene is not necessarily that she's not interested, like, at all. It's more that she doesn't think that it's a good idea right now with all the stuff that that's going on, and that kind of thing. At least that's the kind of what she implies with what she says. But it feels like that relationship, like, there's definitely chemistry there. That they've been kind of compatible enough and nice and entertaining enough when they've been together, until last episode where it got a little bit rockier. But this part of the story, this like almost kiss and then the embarrassment when she kind of pulls away, is where it starts to feel a bit more like typical melodrama stuff to me, where I'm just kind of like, it feels like we've just been waiting for a move to happen, and now the move has happened, and it's like, oh, it's caused some drama, as opposed to it feeling like a crescendo to like an inevitable moment. You know, it feels like you're kind of waiting for just the move to be made. In the same way that you're just kind of waiting for 3 episodes for Dexter to finally work up the courage and go and talk to his son. And he does at the end of this episode, and it is motivated because Harrison's about to do something that kind of provokes Dexter into action. But it just kind of feels like, oh, he's watching another episode, he's still watching him. Oh, at the end, he's going to jump in and do it now. Um, you know, everything doesn't necessarily have like a super clean, like natural knock-on effect. Sometimes it just kind of feels like we're at that point in the story now. It's time to do it. You know, everything Dexter's been doing these last couple of episodes has felt so separate from the Harrison stuff, other than just the odd little bit where he says, "Oh, this reminds me of my son," or "My son doesn't even think of me that way," or something. It's very separate, and it feels like we're intersecting now just because it's time to do it. Now, again, Dexter has a reason for doing it in the moment, but it's really just because I don't know. It doesn't feel smooth to me in that way. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that every time the show introduces like a potentially good like relationship or idea, I kind of worry about how lukewarm the actual payoff to it's going to be. Like, cause I don't think Dexter putting his hand on the shoulder and saying "Don't do it," and then Harrison being like, "Dad," is that exciting as of a cliffhanger? Because yeah, it's obviously it's new to Harrison that Dexter's alive, but it's not that exciting to us. I think it's kind of a weak cliffhanger for us as the audience. But yeah, I mean the Batista stuff. Obviously, I have to bring up a little bit. He is in New York. He's looking for the truck. Turns out that's the truck that Harrison was using, and he sold it to someone. And which I think we did see technically. We saw him talking to his friend and said he'd sell him the truck an episode or two ago. But Batista's basically convinced at this point, once he hears about the murder, which he hears basically from Elsa, who comes over to him, and because she sees him talking to Harrison, Harrison looks kind of upset as he walks away from the conversation. And it's not even like Batista said anything bad that conversation. It was just kind of awkward, and he's trying to keep up his you know, his stone face kind of thing. She goes over and says, "Hey, you're police. If you think Harrison has anything to do with that murder, you're absolutely out of your mind." So she's doing a nice thing. She's trying to protect him, right? She's trying to stick up for him. But of course, this alerts Batista to the fact that there's a murder and that Harrison is in any way associated with it. So he goes to our detectives, or Lady Sherlock. Ah, God. Like, I made fun of last episode the whole headphones with the Bee Gees bit because I thought it was really lame. The fact that they're making it such a recurring bit that we cut to her this episode and she's got headphones on, looking at her computer, listening to Staying Alive. It's the same song. It's not even like a different Bee Gees song. Never mind a different band entirely. It's the exact same song. We cut to her and we get that same riff that you get from that song, and she's like locked in on her investigation. That is just a lame character trope or character quirk that she has. Like it feels just so try hard, not working for me at all. But Batista comes and talks to them. Although when he comes to speak to Harrison later in the episode, he reveals that he's not mentioned who Harrison is to them, and he might keep it that way. But he basically claims that he just wants Harrison to confirm what he thinks he knows. He wants Harrison to admit that his dad was the Bay Harbor butcher, and that he maybe taught Harrison a few things. Like I mean, whether or not you believe Batista, but this next part, you know, it's kind of up to you at this point. But he says that, you know what, that guy that died seemed like a really big asshole. Like, good riddance. Like, I'm not really even fussed about that. I just want to know for sure. I want it confirmed that Dexter is who I think he is, and, you know, whatever from there, right? So, you know, it's kind of like it's an okay confrontation. Like, Batista's stuff has been almost, I would say, by far my least favorite part of the show, although Detective Lady's kind of like encroached on it a little bit with her shenanigans. Basically, the cops in Dexter are usually annoying. Like, I remember a lot of the side plots in the original show with the cops being just really like a pain in the ass to get through as well. But he basically says to him that, hey, if you're starting on this path, if you're going down this dark path that I think your father was also on, then, you know, it's just going to lead to a miserable life. I can't remember the exact phrasing that he used, but, you know, like, I don't want you to go down this path. So just let me know. Let me know that Dexter did these things, or admitted to you that he'd done these things, and whatever, right? Now, do I actually think Batista would just let it go and not, like, convince himself to turn himself in for this murder? I don't know. I don't. I feel like he wouldn't. I feel like Batista would still want him to go turn himself in. I also would like to point out that he retired, from what he said last episode, but he's still flashing his badge at people to say that he's police, which feels slightly illegal. Which, admittedly, compared to, like, what all the other characters in this show are doing with the serial killing, it's nothing. But, like, you know, he's supposed to be a cop, or was a cop. He's not anymore. That's actually the point. He's not. Anyway, so they do a motif here where Harrison actually gets a call from the jeweler who was fixing the victim's watch, because that was something the victim had asked him to do before everything went down in episode 1. So he gets the guy's watch back, and they do this thing where he keeps hearing it ticking. It's, like, really loud in his ear, like it's, like, you know, this conscience, like, just ticking at him and counting down to when he's eventually going to get, like, caught or captured or whatever. And he hears it, like, so much that he puts it in a safe, and he still hears it, and he's trying to get away from it. But later on in the episode, after he's had these conversations with Batista, and he kind of, like, runs away and just kind of pretends he doesn't know anything, even though his face is kind of telling a different story in a lot of ways, he starts hearing the ticking again, and it's in the soundtrack. So it's, like, kind of a motif the episode has, to the point where he actually takes out his phone, looks at the card that he got from the detective, and it looks like he's about to call and turn himself in. Like, admit what happened and kind of stop himself from going down the path that Dexter went down. Because Dexter's whole thing, of course, rule number 1, don't get caught. And there's stuff in this episode where, you know, Dexter's, like, talking to his dead dad, and his dad's talking about how, you know, I didn't necessarily understand you entirely, but I knew I needed to be there to try and help you discover who you were and try and, like, do the best I could for you, regardless of our differences and that kind of thing. And that's obviously provoking Dexter into maybe going after Harrison, and he's scared that Harrison won't want him to be alive, that he doesn't want him around, so on and so on. But I guess the one thing that annoys me a little bit about the ending, other than just I don't think it's a great cliffhanger, it's probably the fact that he takes out the phone, dials the number for the detective, it rings, maybe, I don't know if you hear her say hello, or he hangs up just before she does, but he hangs up as if, like, he was going to, but he's decided against it. But then he walks to the police station, and that's where this final moment takes place, where he's, like, walking towards the police station, and Dexter's hand goes on his shoulder and says, "Don't do it, Harrison." Dun dun dun, cut to credits. I think the tease of him wanting to turn himself in is good. I think it makes sense that he would maybe think, I don't want to be a serial killer, I don't want to be like my dad, and maybe the right thing to do is to face the consequences of this. Like, be honest about why I did it. People will be definitely a lot more sympathetic to this one murder based on who it was and the situation he was in, compared to, like, you know, his dad or any other serial killer. So it's an interesting beat for him to go through, and I think that could have just been, like, enough. Like, honestly, I think the ending would have played better for me if it just ended with him walking towards the police station and cutting to credits there, and then you start next episode with Dexter stopping him. I think that might have worked better for me, just because it took the emphasis away from what he wanted. Like, you know, Harrison wanting to turn himself in is an interesting character, like, beat. There's an interesting place for him to want to go and for him to consider. And I think that is a more interesting, like, sort of, dare I say, slightly poignant moment to end on. Whereas when you bring in Dexter and you make it Harrison being shocked that Dexter's alive, something that's not a surprise to us, we know he's alive. We've known the whole time he's been alive, so it's nothing to us as a surprise. I don't think that moment is as interesting, and I think it actually takes the focus away of the part that's actually interesting about this, is that he wants to face the music. He wants to go in and just be honest about it and like turn himself in and say, "Hey, I did this, and I don't want to be a monster. I want to, go through the results of this, right?" Um, I think that is more interesting than the dun dun dun, Dad, you're alive, which is a bit more soap opera. It's a bit more melodramatic, and obviously the moment would still have to be there, right? If you did it at the start of the next episode, it would still be there, but it would be fine because it would just be like the lead into the opening title, and like, of course, he was going to step in and potentially give his son some terrible advice, or maybe good advice. Maybe that's the arc of the season, is that he'll give advice that his father would never have given him by the end. Maybe that's part of the point here, is he'll learn that, to borrow a line from season 2 of The Last of Us, maybe he will learn that he needs to do a little bit better than Harry did. And maybe he will do a little bit better than Harry did by realizing that something Harry would have done is not the right thing for him to do. That's potentially an interesting point to take it through, but we'll see if it goes through with it. Yeah, I think that's everything. Obviously, there was a lot of little details with the various other killers and whatnot. I suspect that some of the other ones we'll see again at these other gatherings. We'll see Dexter kill some of them. I wonder almost if this does lead to Dinklage himself being on the table, but I don't know if Dexter's code allows for that yet. Maybe the way he facilitates these killers is enough to like justify it in his mind, but I don't know. It's like, I think Dinklage is good in the episode. I think Kristen Ritter is solid. She's kind of playing a very typical character for her, as weird as that is to say. Not that I've seen her play a serial killer before, but she always kind of has a similar kind of attitude. There is a nice little touch though at one point where Dexter thinks something in his head when they're reacting to, I think it's Neil Patrick Harris is doing his little slideshow about his next victim, and Dexter thinks something in his head, and then Kristen Ritter says the exact thing he was just thinking, and it's just a little way of knowing, hey, maybe these two are like compatible, and there's something here, or at the very least, you understand why he might be getting attracted to her beyond just the physical appearance. So, yeah, there you go. That's episode 4. We're getting there. I don't know. Is episode 6 already out? It might be. Episode 5 is the last episode when I went to watch episode 2, but that was nearly a week ago now, so there's probably an episode 6 out. It feels weird to say that I liked this episode, but I liked the main plot. Or at least I was entertained by the main plot enough that I was kind of having a bit of fun along the way. I do still think some of the other side plots risk ruining my mood, and I do still think the running trope of the Bee Gees and the headphones is absurd and kind of lame, but is what it is. So we'll see how things go next episode. So let me know what you thought of this episode in the comments. You can like, subscribe, helps out a bunch if you do. It's free to do those things, so if that's all you can do, then that's great. Hit those buttons. If you can go a little bit further than that, you can support us via Patreon, patreon.com/MailFuzzTV, or YouTube membership, also an option. But I recommend Patreon just purely because you get all the bonus content from the movie channel as well. Check out MailFuzz Movies, where all the movie podcasts live. But that is me. Thank you very much for joining. I do appreciate it. Keep watching TV. Have you got any vanilla?